see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hello, everyone. I'm Edwin Rutch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and this is panel number 5. And perhaps each of you could introduce yourselves. Joe, if you'd like to start. Again, we had a little problem with the previous call, but we're going to try again.
I'm Joe Brummer. I'm the Associate Executive Director of a Community Mediation Center in Connecticut and a member of the National Association for Community Mediation's board. And I sort of took up studying empathy as a hobby. I think it's a fascinating subject to talk about, and I think it's what we need to start changing some of the violence that we see and some of the bad behaviors, just, the yuck.
Rhonda?
I'm Rhonda Morton. I live in upstate New York and sometimes in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I did a TED Talk on empathy, encouraging people to be empathy ambassadors, because from childhood, I basically have been a very empathetic person, and I believe that world peace is possible, and that empathy is a foundational skill for that. I'm also a improvisational performing artist and a coach and consultant. I use embodied sort of brain-body behavior linkages to help people figure out how to get exactly what they want out of their lives.
And I'm Edwin Rutch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy and convener of this conference on how to build a culture of empathy. And recently I saw a TED Talk, and it was the person in the TED Talk was kind of analyzing speeches and saying really good speeches have this format. You're shaking your head, maybe you saw it.
Yeah, it's good.
And It was like, state the problem, where are we now, and then where are we going? And then back to what's the problem? Where are we going? So I thought, hey, that's really great. And so I was starting to think of what is the kind of the problem that we have right now, and what does this vision of a culture of empathy look like? So I was kind of thinking, well, maybe we can start with some of the problems that we see out there, and I know, Joe, you're dealing with the problems on an ongoing basis as a mediator. So what kind of problems are you seeing out there? What kind of conflicts? And
I think as a mediator, I get to see a lot of different conflicts. So we get to see something different with youth than we see, say, with parents who are no longer married or no longer a couple, but still co-parents. Or even for several years, I did criminal mediation where people had been arrested for misdemeanor crimes like threatening or minor assault. And I think you often find that people get wrapped up enough in their own stuff and what they think they deserve or they think it should be in the world, and they have a really hard time empathizing with what is going on with other people. Mm-hmm. I did a mediation between, let me change the story slightly. I'll change the genders and identity, but not the story. I did a mediation between these two young men that had been fighting in school, and they were being told they couldn't go to the dance. And what's interesting is after each of them got to listen to each other, realized that they misunderstood each other, realized that their intentions with each other were the opposite of what they'd expected, they went right back to being friends. And what needed to happen between them was some empathy about each other, like some understanding of where each other were. And when they got there, things were fine. Before that, they wanted to kill each other and were about to be willing to be suspended from school, willing to, at great risk to them, to their own lives, and great consequences, duke it out. And it's not the first time I've seen that stuff. We're and I think it's a lot to do with media and sort of our culture right now isn't a culture of empathy. It's a culture of competition and a culture of you aren't really successful or happy until you get X. And I think that's causing a problem for people, because the want to get X becomes more important than the want to understand other people. And I think that sort of, in small terms, might sum up a lot of the conflicts that I see in mediation.
So as people just aren't hearing each other, they're kind of shooting for X, working towards X, kind of ignoring everybody else and just striving for whatever X is.
Yeah. Often.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about this myself and realizing that I don't really come into contact much with conflict. And that's partly because I don't have any kind of daily media intake. I don't read a paper. I don't go online. I don't have a television. So, and I read things like Ode magazine and, basically uplifting and good news and great stories about people being fabulous on the planet and doing, wonderful things and being super loving to all humanity and the whole, beyond humanity. And so sometimes I wonder if all of this can be shaped by our worldview, and whether we can in fact shape our worldview by what we view. So it's kind of a circle. So if I know that studies show that, the world isn't anywhere near as violent as we think it is. And partly we think it is because we're getting that kind of input all the time, and we're wired to remember the bad stuff. We're, anything that, threatening or scary inputs, we remember more than good, happy, satisfying inputs. Just, from Neanderthal times, that's the way our brains are set up to operate. So if you're going to watch the news every night, and I'll tell you what, I haven't had a television my whole adult life, but I see it every once in a while. You can't avoid it. And it has gotten so bad in terms of when you watch the news, it doesn't even feel like reporters. It just feels like opinionating, and usually, frothing at the mouth kind of opinionating about how horrible someone is. And that seems to not be a great way to run our lives with that. And then thinking about how much more we see televisions. You can barely stand in a line somewhere. I sometimes make the trek across Massachusetts and the Interstate 90 there. You go to the gas station and there's, a television screen trying to pump you full of information as you're putting your tank full of gas. And so it's like, it's never ending. And I think we get so used to it that we don't even know we're being sort of slowly poisoned to death with these images and ideas and worldviews and core values and all of that. So I'll be quiet for a minute, but that's my little soapbox around, being careful of what we take in and how it then affects what we think is possible. Whether we think world peace is possible, whether we think getting along with our neighbors is possible, whether we think, resolving a conflict with someone we used to be friends with is possible,
Yeah, it's like we get kind of into this worldview state of being, and it becomes kind of a new normalcy, and we don't even see the maybe the pain and the stress kind of within it. I remember I did a lot of traveling. When I was after high school, spent like 10 years traveling around the world. And I remember coming back, even at that time, this is like in the 70s, coming back to the United States and watching TV and I could just, it was just something about it. It just felt so controlled and so manipulated. And as I started, and I felt the real distance from it. But with time, it's like I started being absorbed, in that state where it just became a normal state. So it's like somehow, maybe you need to get outside of outside of the stress, whatever is going on, to be able to see from a different point of view.
Well, maybe this is a little bit of a far field example, but years ago, whenever that movie Thelma and Louise was airing, a friend of mine and I, a woman friend of mine and I, went to see this movie, and we came out of there and we were just so angry with men. Like, oh, men are just horrible. Like, just get rid of all of them. Because in that movie, there's every kind of bad guy you can think of. Every type of bad guy is depicted in this movie. But by the time we left the movie theater, by the time we got back to my house, it was kind of like we had reminded ourselves that we personally didn't know anybody who fit into that. Like, none of the men we knew were like those men. That all the men we knew were decent, upright, loving, compassionate, fabulous, loyal, all those kinds of things. So it was like, whoa, we were about ready to throw them all out. Just because we had been so steeped in this, horrible men worldview for 2 hours, Didn't even take 2 hours,
Well, there is a lot of that view if you look at, I like to watch Fox and MSNBC and kind of switch between the channels. And you can just feel the energy, just this conflict, it's just, going at each other. So, that's kind of what we're kind of being bathed in.
Yeah. Yeah. But we do have a choice. We don't have to do that. We don't.
I was thinking the same thing. There's a choice, like turn it off and walk away from it. I mean, one of the reasons that the news stations like Fox or MSNBC keep that going is because we keep watching and we consider that to be entertainment. And I think at heart we're all a little bit of a conflict junkie. And I love that term. I stole that term off one of my mediation students, that, conflict junkie. And I think we all, in our own little way. And when you're sitting home, in your, armchair watching Fox News or MSNBC, and these, different, commentators go back and forth at each other, pulling on their so-called experts who may or may not be experts. It's all, all that conflict and drama is appealing to us, and it's sort of what we would consider the real world version of what the Kardashians or any of these other it's reality TV, which is about as real as the Pillsbury Doughboy.
Yeah, it's definitely showbiz. Like if we reminding ourselves that this is showbiz, and the biz stands for business because they're trying to sell products and, have advertisers and all of that. So that, just to say, I don't choose to get myself brainwashed by plugging into that stuff. And, it's so easy, because I am a living example. It is so easy to live without it. You don't need it. I used to say that if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, that's just what the news is every day, over and over again, a new version, plug in new names. It's the same conflicts, and you don't need to remind yourself that that's happening out there. Look around and see all the good things that are happening, or go make some good things happen. I don't know. I feel a little itchy right now.
We didn't go to the same extreme. We didn't get rid of our television or not own it. We don't really watch television. What we do is, if we want to watch a series, we'll watch the series on Netflix where I don't get bombarded with commercials.
Right.
And then I can take in really good entertainment that I really enjoy. Good filmmaking, good, there's some good television with good storytelling, and I get to sort of get the light version without, commercials trying to tell me all the products I need to buy to make my life perfect when
Right.
I don't need those products.
So maybe to step back from that a little bit, that if we're kind of living in a kind of image world of conflict, we're kind of like bathed in the conflict, and that's getting us all riled up and kind of into that kind of mental space. Is to step back, kind of shut out some of that, and kind of look at maybe nurturing, finding where the empathy is, and nurturing that, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that whatever you notice grows. So keeping your awareness open to moments of empathy. I recently, just this week, my next door neighbor is elderly, and we had a little sudden ice storm, and she fell and broke her collarbone.
Ouch.
And we couldn't get her up, because to lift her would have meant to hurt her. So we just I called the ambulance. And I went in and I got her a blanket and stood over her with an umbrella because it's precipitating at this point. But within 10, 15 minutes, because there was a big pileup on the bridge next to us, so no ambulance were available. So we stood out there for 20 minutes. Within 10 or 15 minutes, 5 different people from my neighborhood, just, within 5 houses on either side of me, came to see what they could do. My son came out of my house. He put salt on the sidewalk. He went and got me a coat and gloves. Someone else went and got one of those, blankets that reflect heat onto, people in the wilderness. Somebody else stood at the end of the sidewalk, because this happened in the backyard, and was ready to flag down the ambulance. 5 people just came out of their houses to help this woman. And that happens over and over and over and over a million times the world over every day. But that doesn't get reported on the news. One person shooting another person in an act of passion, that's what, you spend 3 hours looking at over and over on television when it happens.
Well, maybe we need to find ways of making empathy entertaining, right? It's like...
Well, we do.
Right.
There is empathy. There's some research. We've sort of seen the what's his name, Zask, and the whole story about oxytocin. When you watch the Hallmark Channel and you watch these very shows that make you feel good. The ending comes and you feel really happy for the characters, and you're talking about raising your body's levels of serotonin and oxytocin, the stuff that is that empathy is made of. Your mirror neurons are kicking off, and you're experiencing joy for other people as if it's happening to you. On the same return, if you're watching these really intense anxiety-driven shows with lots of conflict, you're raising your body's levels of cortisol, of drug, hormones that kill you. That's the stuff that heart attacks are made of. So as you're watching all of these shows, your mirror neurons are firing off with the anxiety and negativity as if that stuff's happening to you. So, I don't know that who knows what the research says about whether or not people who watch that stuff versus something else live longer. I would make the wild assertion that I bet that they live longer, because you're physically giving yourself good stuff versus giving yourself a lot of negative. Those negative things aren't just negative to you emotionally and spiritually; they're physically having an effect on you.
Right. So even if you don't live longer, you live better.
Yeah,
For that.
I think Maya probably has the answer to what studies have been done, but
I know, I was just missing Maya. Like, she would pop in with the science here and do us proud. But yeah.
Well, somehow the like what you're doing, Joe, is like the mediation. So like people are in conflict. And the typical reality show is these people striving for that goal, they're kind of in conflict and they're kind of, trying to outmaneuver each other and kind of win. And and there and that's really not what you're doing with conflict resolution. It's like you're bringing the people together to have them connect to each other, so at the end that there's a story of people in connection and working together. So that's like a whole different narrative than the typical reality show that I'm seeing. And it's like, if
Right.
there's some way, and Rhonda is as an actor and doing teaching of improv acting, it seems like that's somehow what we need to create, is like a narrative. It's like maybe an empathic formula that ends in transformation, connection, and creativity, going forward, and make that entertaining, as maybe even creating it as an alternative to the reality show. But I think people are, if it could be formulated right, I think people are kind of hungry for that.
Well, Edwin, are you familiar with playback theater
I've heard of it.
or theater of the oppressed? Those are practices, theater practices. I'm more familiar actually with playback than I am with theater of the oppressed. But in playback, you actually you take on, the actors take on a story from the audience. So they'll give you, 3 sentences that kind of summarize what they went through in a particular situation, and then the actors take it on and make it act it out and make it into a story, and it's very therapeutic and sort of cathartic to see your story portrayed in that way. So I think there are people who are doing that, and I think that's one of the reasons why we go to theaters. It's one of the reasons why we watch television or watch, things being acted out rather than just going around and living our own lives. Like, we could just be living our lives instead of watching other people pretend they're living their lives, But we do that because of those mirror neurons. We want to feel whatever those people on the screen or on the stage are feeling. And, it kind of behooves those of us who have taken on that job to make sure that we are honoring the sort of sacred role that we enjoy there, and take it seriously and realize that what we are putting out there should have some kind of value to humanity, so it's not just, gratuitous violence, gratuitous, you name it,
Yeah, are you saying that like we should require that, or it's just?
I don't know. Of course, you can't require something like that, but I think, I don't know. I think enlightened people, would want to be involved in theater of that sort versus theater that's just going to incite people or scare people or hurt people in some way.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like, how do we bring that to just people who, like, I kind of like adventure, action movies sometimes. And, my partner, Joan, it's like, she wants the relationships, the romance movies where there's a dialogue and there's the conflict, and the conflict gets, the people drift apart and they come back together, and generally, it's a bit of a happy ending, and they've gone through. What?
I love adventure movies. I just don't like it when people are mean to each other. So there's a genre, movies where people aren't mean to each other. That's the one
I think there's a big difference between adventure movies or, movies that, but I think that when you say there's an adventure movie, they're still talking about being a plot. Where a lot of these, I guess what they call them now is action movies. there might be about 10 minutes of plot and 60 minutes of car explosions. And that I just think it's not. And some of these are what are being the blockbusters. And it amazes me because there's no substance in it. It's not good filmmaking. And yet that's what people, I think what sells is the adrenaline rush.
I was just going to say that. Where is Maya again? Because, there is that chemical reaction that happens and you can get addicted to it. It really is truly an addiction thing where you have to have your adrenaline spiking all the time or you're not a happy person. You think your life is boring unless you're watching, 12 murders an hour or something.
Well, that's the thing I'm looking at. It's like right there what you're talking about is that excitement that happens is like really finding the excitement within empathy, right? I mean, I do like freestyle dance, and there's a lot of creativity and kind of excitement and newness, and the creativity that happens exploring new kind of connections and new movements. So it's really fulfilling and fun and energetic, and it's like somehow we need that. It can't be, sometimes when I think of empathy, it gets very monotone. I'm just listening to somebody and hearing what they have to say. There's got to be more of a dynamic fun and creativity in it.
Right. Well, I want to say two things. One is that, most people think sex is exciting. And, sex and empathy kind of go hand in hand from my point of view.
Mine too. I'm right there.
So we could just keep it exciting that way. But also to go back to the action movie kind of thing versus the violence, there is the hero's journey, and we're so attracted to the hero's journey over and over and over again. They just, repackage it and repackage it and repackage it throughout time. It's the Iliad and the Odyssey. And we need that to make meaning in our lives, I think, and we are definitely attracted to those stories where, oh my goodness, someone's in trouble or someone needs to do the right thing, and are they going to do the right thing? And, all of that creates, the conflict as we think of it in literature, and then conflict resolution. I mean, all of that can happen just inside a single person, making a hard decision. So, it's there, and it doesn't have to turn violent. It doesn't have to turn just being mean to each other, to go back to my very scientific term.
Yeah, it's like connecting with people where there's connection with people instead of the beating down of somebody, right? There's a problem and I'm going to beat it down, or I'm going to connect with the person. It's almost like two different ways of dealing with the problem.
Right. Well, here's another thing in terms of, Edwin, what you were talking about, how, present the problem and then what could be. Another problem is how much of our resources go toward finding more and more clever ways to kill each other. And I'm talking now about, the military and all of that. If we took even a fraction of the resources that we spend in that way and did studies about, how to get along, and how, this, like the man you were talking about before, who is, very scientifically looking at, okay, which conflict resolution methods work the best. I mean, if we studied how to make peace and use those resources in that way, we would have utopia, before we know it. It wouldn't be that hard. Why, so the question is, why do we make those choices over and over again? To fight and, be mean to each other, kill each other, struggle, versus figure out what's going on and let's fix it.
There's so much money for the fight part. I mean, it's like trillions of dollars, and it's like very minimal, really, that I see is for the empathy.
Right. Well, Dennis Kucinich started the Peace Department, or the Department of Peace or whatever, I don't know, sometime in the last 5 or 6 years. And it gets, like a hair's width compared to the rest of the pie that the military gets. So, until we start putting our resources and making choices that are more in line with where we want our world to be, we're just going to keep getting the same world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why I'm kind of doing this culture of empathy. It's beyond just the dialogue. We're dialoguing here, which I think is good is like the first step, in building a culture of empathy, starting this dialogue. But there's also kind of the political, in the sense of bringing the dialogue into the national, making it a national dialogue, right? If I watch MSNBC and Fox, I'm not hearing people really talk a lot about empathy there. And there, Fox did a lot of attacks on empathy, and there wasn't a lot of, defense of it and articulation of how they were, like Joe and I, there was an article that was kind of like critical of empathy, and Joe and I, do you want to tell that about that? How we kind of worked on that, Joe?
Well, there was an article that talked about how great negotiators use their head, not their hearts, and so we did a call about that, talking about the fact that I completely disagree that you really can't negotiate all in your head, because you need empathy, you need heart, you need emotions to guide your decisions, you need empathy to really understand. Even if you want to negotiate, you have to be able to use empathy to figure out what kind of an offer to make in negotiation that someone's going to accept. You need empathy. You can't do negotiations without it. So I thought it was a curious article, and the article was really written about a study that was being done that studied empathy versus perspective taking, which I'm sorry, I'm puzzled by what that means, because in the dozen or so, more than dozen or so books that I've read about empathy, and research that I've looked at, empathy is perspective taking. So I don't even know how you could do a study about the differences between, an apple versus an apple. It didn't make any sense to me.
Well, and you get down to, really, if you think about what we know now about mirror neurons, to live is to be empathetic. To be human and alive is to be experiencing empathy all the time. Whether you want to, or whether you're choosing to or not, it's happening to you. So then partly maybe the question is, what do you do with it? What do you do with that empathy that you are feeling? Because you're feeling it, you're experiencing it. Now, what are you going to do about it? And that comes back to you, Edwin, and your concern that we turn all of this into action. That it's not enough to just talk about it. It's not enough to feel it or whatever. You have to turn it into action.
Now you're going back to the David Brooks article about whether or not empathy leads to action, which was his whole take in the New York Times, and his idea that empathy didn't lead people to make action, and I think there's times that's true and there's times it's not true. I think what you find in all of these articles and criticisms of empathy, almost all of the criticism that I've ever seen about empathy, like the David Brooks article, or even this article in Forbes with Victoria Pinchon, is that they're confusing the word empathy and the word sympathy. They're confusing what empathy really is, from a more scientific and more research-based approach. That, empathy just is what it is. It's not positive or negative. It's not. What comes from it may be positive, but empathy and your mirror neurons are like a video camera. They're not picking up things to be, judgment. They just are. I'm feeling what you're experiencing, and it is what it is. It's what we do with it after that suddenly starts to become bad or good.
I
It's
feel a
that
little
whole
different there. You're saying with the mirror, you're saying it's like this neutral state of the mirror neurons. But in a sense, if we have the mirror neurons happening and we're empathizing with each other, and the connection is happening, we're kind of feeling each other's what the other person is feeling, and and we feel safe, and we deepen that. That we're actually getting an oxytocin charge feel, which is a stress relief. So
well,
I see.
that's the lovely fluffy version of that, and I love the fluffy version, but I don't want you to get. I think that's where people start misunderstanding what empathy is really about. Is that empathy isn't just us understanding the connection with other people. It's also I understand your pain, and if I'm experiencing your pain, that's not always, that's one of the reasons that we train. A lot of the training that you give doctors is to reduce their empathy so that they can slice somebody up and do some work. So empathy, it is about that connection. It is about that understanding. We add on to that, whether or not it's good or it's bad or it's positive. It can be very negative. Maya talks about in Born for Love how it's her take that people who are autistic, or some people who are autistic, rather than having a diminished capacity for empathy, have sort of empathy on overdrive. So what they're feeling, the experience and the anxiety or discomfort of others at levels that are just incapacitating. That's not warm and fluffy. That's it. Empathy is just that process in our brains of being able to understand where other people are. So and it has those two pieces. Emotionally, we understand how someone is feeling, and two, we can take their perspective. And none of that's either bad or good. It often, more often than not, will lead to good things, because why wouldn't understanding lead to good things? Really, it's about the understanding process, and then where it goes from there, I think, might be deeper connections, or it might be complete discomfort and pain, because I'm now going to react to your pain. So empathy is just a step that takes us to these other things like sympathy or understanding or incapacitating pain if you're going to be if you're autistic. So empathy, it's in itself is basically neutral.
And I think I want to add to that and say that partly it's about making a decision then about what you're going to do with that empathy, because certainly, there are manipulators and
Yeah.
Folks who would absolutely take advantage of knowing what you're feeling or how you might feel if, I do this to you or I say this to you. I mean, just going and buying a car, those salespeople, they got your number,
and that in itself is also empathy. Empathy is me being able. It's me knowing exactly what to say to hurt you. Well, that's empathy. I have to be able to stand in your shoes and know what will hurt you. That's not fluffy and happy. That's yuck.
Right.
So empathy is just the process. It's what we're doing with that process. And I think this is definitely, I think, what Maya talks about in Born for Love is that, and also Mary Gordon talks about this in her book Roots of Empathy, that when we develop children and nurture empathy in them, then they have the ability to really understand each other's pain, know what hurts each other, and then as humans, we do react to that in positive ways. There's that recent article that's out with interviewing Franz Duvall, the author of The Age of Empathy, where he's talking about, we are naturally, kind. We are naturally compassionate. It's that we have to sort of nurture that in ourselves. And empathy is, if we raise children who are empathetic, then you end up with adults who don't take advantage of other people, that don't go out and take a $5 million bonus while their neighbor is starving, because empathetic people don't do those things.
Right.
You know, and I think that's sort of the arguments that I've read in most of these books. Franz Duval, Maya, Jeremy Rifkin talks about how, you know, we really need to change the way we're seeing things because we're too old school. You know, this isn't prior Age of Enlightenment stuff. We're a new generation. And I think that's, if you want to build a culture of empathy, that's where we have to start. We have to start with kids and start nurturing and start creating adults who are in touch with empathy. And the way you're going to do that is to start with them as kids. And I know Maya's book talks about this, that we actually can continue to nurture and develop empathy well into our later years. Mothers increase their ability to empathize with their children after the children are born. And that's due to the raised oxytocin levels. We have the capacity to nurture empathy at every age. So we have the most capacity when we're young. So start there. But if your school systems are so worried about preparing kids for the test that prepares them for the test so they can take the big test, there's no room in there. There's no room in there for them to play mirroring games. There's no room in there to learn empathy. Instead, we're obsessed with whether or not they can pass a math test. And then we act all surprised when they grow up to be bankers, really good at math, who will rip everybody off. Of course they will. They have no empathy. We taught them how to do math. We didn't teach them how to do it with empathy.
Well, you know what, Joe? I think we're kind of arguing both sides of the coin, though, because I think what we're saying so far here is that empathy exists. It just is, and we have it, and it's built into our bodies and our brains and all of that. What I think I'm also hearing us say, and the point that you're making, and I just want to echo, is that along with that, you have to have a teaching of values that are about loving each other and making peace instead of war, and, you know, being good to each other and being neighborly and those kinds of things, because otherwise then people use empathy to hurt each other, to rip each other off, to you know, whatever, fill in the blank. So empathy can be used either way. It's like a tool, you know. So you have to, along with increasing people's capacity to feel what other people are feeling and nurturing that idea of being empathetic, you have to couple that with values around, you know, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. You know, and you know, very basically there, I mean, that's taught in every religion anywhere. But then on top of that, you're like, let's get really smart about this. Like, why would we want to make ourselves unhealthy? Why would we want to, you know, use the world's resources to kill each other instead of, you know, figuring out global warming or figuring out world hunger or, you know, any of these other big problems that we face around the world? You know, we could be solving those problems if we had the brain power and the money and the resources that the military industrial complex has. So, you know, I think, you know, so not to necessarily bash an entire class and generation of people, although I'm about to, it's almost like we have to have the generation who grew up thinking might makes right, we have to have that generation die and not be leading us. And we need a generation, and it'll be my kids and their kids, who get it that we're all connected, because they are. They push their buttons and they're, you know, they're talking to each other around the world. My daughter traveled to more places, you know, around internationally by the time she was 20 than it made my head spin, you know. And I see that that's just what young people are doing. And that builds those connections and those values around we have to take care of each other and we are all one. And, you know, what are you talking about? Just because someone lives in a different country, we're going to go to war with them? Or they have a different color skin or a different religion or a different whatever. Wait, no, we have lots more in common than we do different. And so let's figure that out. So I think it's this younger generation, if they can survive us, you know, the folks our age and older, if they can just live long enough to, you know, outlive us and outsmart us, that we have a fighting chance, you know, that world peace can happen.
Perhaps they'll outlove us, you know.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you know, and there's some, I forget, there's the book Millenniums. Don't ask me who wrote it, I can't remember. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about the fact that this generation growing up is more global. Information is readily available to them. They also think nothing of texting back and forth, minusing out the empathy, where they're just getting the words back and forth.
Right.
And there's some evidence out there that this generation is 30 to 40% less empathetic than previous generations. And I think that's the wake-up call and the sort of subtitle of Maya's book, Born for Love, you know, why empathy is essential and endangered. Because I think while that's true, this is more global. We've also been promoting this sort of don't connect with your neighbor attitude. And a lot of these kids today grew up with some values that don't promote empathy. Like, I actually am taking this from Maya's book, Born for Love, where, you know, it used to be that human beings were raised in clans of people, you know, 30, 40 families, all taking care of these same kids. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood where, you know, my parents, you know, would yell at me for doing something I shouldn't be doing, but the neighbors' parents were just as likely to yell at me, and for the same stuff. You know, there was sort of group child rearing, where a lot of these kids, you know, some of the values that families have today is that you don't share your family stuff with other people. You know, it's personal. You know, you don't share that with the neighbors. You know, there's sort of this, you know, very, you know, right to privacy and all, which I don't disagree with those things in the same, but I think they've gone to an extreme that isn't helping us develop empathy.
Well, I wanted
you know,
to
the whole idea of parents don't want to be told how to parent their kids.
We're getting a little bit of background noise there, I think, Joe, but I wanted to kind of go back to kind of track some of the things that we covered here. I was kind of saying, well, you know, for me, empathy is more like this positive kind of experience. And then I was hearing that, well, empathy is kind of neutral, and, you know, it can go either kind of this direction or that direction. And then it was like that we need values to kind of keep the empathy, you know, in a positive kind of a way. So, and then that children, I mean, the younger people are going to be more empathic, and that's kind of our hope. It was kind of some of the things that I was hearing. But kind of even stepping back, is for me, one of the ways of building a culture of empathy is first to have a dialogue about it. And then the second part of that dialogue, I've been kind of making notes as I do these interviews. And for me, the next part is to, in the dialogue, to be able to address all these different issues that kind of come up. And so one of the issues is empathy, you know, can it be used negatively or, you know, positively? And I did interview, you know, Franz de Waal, and he used the story, well, it can be used, you know, either direction. You know, the used car salesman is manipulating you. And then Simon Baron-Cohen, in his book, The Science of Evil, he actually, his way of looking at it is that what they're using is perspective taking, and that they're not having affective or kind of the mirrored empathy where they're really feeling who you are. So that there's a quality of disconnect in that. So I mean, it's not like we're going to be totally clear on this as like an evolving exploration, and it's just the dialogue itself is, I think, is important, but that we become very articulate so that we can answer all these type of questions, I think, and become educated, like, read all the books, study it, and really get kind of clear so that when we're, I kind of imagine being on Fox News, right? It's like talking to them when they're attacking empathy, like Glenn Beck said, empathic fascism is coming our way. It starts with smiley, happy faces, and then, then they take away your guns and all this kind of stuff. But when that happens, I want to be able to dialogue with them and kind of be able to articulate clearly and, not get muddled about, is empathy good or is it bad? I think there's still a lot of, kind of work to be done around that. But I think that to build a culture of empathy, we're going to need to really get kind of clear on those. And I personally feel, real deep empathy for me is kind of a positive. That's the oxytocin. And my mother always used to say, she was trying to promote marriage, right? And she says, sorrows shared are sorrows halved. Joys shared are joys doubled. And it's really empathy. That's really an empathy story. It's because you're connecting with somebody else that sure, you're going to have hard times, but the oxytocin is going to lessen the pain of those hard times. And then you're going to have good times, and the oxytocin is going to, ramp up the good joy feelings. So.
Right, yeah. Yay to your mom for raising you, Edwin.
Yeah, I'll tell her about that. That she'll get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
I actually want to interview them at some point too. My folks. I was just up there, so been talking to them. They're very conservative, and I'm talking, but they have. You can see is there. If I talk about empathy and I know how to speak about it, that it really is affecting the dialogue. There's two parts to it. So the one part is to be able to talk about it at kind of this understanding level, and the other part was to empathize with them. Say, oh, you're feeling, that there's people aren't empathic, or you're feeling people don't care about you, and it's causing you pain. So it seems like in this dialogue, we need to be, have the cognitive understanding, but we also need to empathize with the people that we're talking about to build that culture.
Yeah, we have to sell them empathy.
Yeah.
Like the used car salesman, we're selling empathy.
Yeah, we have to sell it to them. I see.
It puzzles me a little bit that when, I hear you guys talk about needing to sell people empathy, which I agree. For some reason, we have to do that. It surprises me that things like Franz Duvall's book, The Age of Empathy, which I thought it was one of the first books I read about empathy, and thought, wow, this is really neat stuff. And then, I read Dan Pink's book, Drive, and he talks a lot about empathy and motivation and what really motivates us. Then you start reading The Empathetic Civilization, which I'll say that's the equivalent of reading War and Peace. I mean, it's like what?
Right, yeah.
I think he could have done 2 books in it. I would have been happier.
Right.
I have to empathize with how long it takes to read a book this thick. But if all these books and even the really cool RSA Animate video on empathy, The Empathetic Civilization from Jeremy Rifkin, if this stuff didn't sell people on empathy, I don't know that there's anything magical I could say that's going to sell them.
Right.
Other than having people actually experience empathy. Where you talk about giving your parents empathy, or having people coming to mediations where they finally just get heard. It's been months and months, years and years. I've been fighting back and forth about this conflict. Now I get to sit down at the table and somebody finally just listens to my story. And I think oftentimes that's what people really wanted in the first place. They just wanted they wanted to be heard.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the selling because it's, I kind of think of it like I have an evangelical background, right? Evangelical Baptist. So I talk with my friends. I say, we need an evangelical empathy, It's like, it really works. It's like, it's not just be like, please be empathic. It's like, folks, we got to be empathic. It's getting serious. So I have a little bit of that quality. And I think we kind of need it as well, to kind of, because there's a lot of those TV shows that we were talking about are selling fear, and a lot of other, domination. And I mean, they're out there selling it, and promoting it. And
well, yeah. And Edwin, if you think about it, an evangelical message typically is one that's in the minority, or you wouldn't have to do it. You wouldn't have to have it, right? And I was thinking about this sometime in the last week about how I've sort of been that, black sheep of my family. I've been the weirdo without the television. I've been I've always been on sort of the fringy parts of society or culture. And until most recently in my life, I tended to I guess, I would be willing to talk about it, but I tended to do it kind of quietly, or with people I knew were probably bending that way anyway, or whatever. And now I'm realizing that I have to get evangelical, and partly it's because of mirror neurons. If I can get really excited about, you guys, we can have world peace, and think about it, think what it would be like, and, do the Martin Luther King thing about world peace, like he did about civil rights, and get people fired up, and get them to get excited about it, and energized around it. That's really what that evangelical thing is all about. So if we, and, speaking of evangelicals, I mean, if Jesus wasn't the first and best, or one of the first and best messengers for empathy, and
empathy ambassador.
Yeah, hello. So I think we who believe in it really do have to start getting more vocal and bigger in our message and our energy around our message, and who we're willing to sort of go toe to toe with in giving that message. So we're not just preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And maybe it's just because I'm older. I was like, what have I got to lose? My family already thinks I'm a nutcase. So.
Yeah, well, there's something, I think it's kind of like now at this point in time, we're starting to get the vocabulary and the clarity, from the science, like you're saying, that before it was things like in the 60s, it was, love, right? And love is so big and so, overwhelming. It seems like, I can't love everybody. But for me, empathy is like this gateway drug, right? It's like pot. It's like you start with it, and it's like the first step, right? And then you have some of that, and you want to move on to cocaine, right? Which is caring and kindness and generosity and compassion, and then you kind of graduate up to the heroin, which is love, But you got to start with the gateway drug.
Right.
I think the conservatives have just stopped listening. But I think you're right about trying to sort of evangelize people about world peace, And at the same time, I think so many people aren't ready to hear that message because they hear the words world peace. And I think what they envision is a world. I'm not actually. I have no idea what they envision, but I know so many people that like they say, I really think world peace is possible. And they, oh, God, these people, the reaction that you sort of get, or you're a nutcase if you believe in it. And
Right.
I think at some point that's where I think sort of Marshall Rosenberg's ideas about empathy have been valuable, is to let's empathize with why it's hard for you to picture that, or rather than saying, no, it's possible, or trying to convince people that it's all possible. Let's empathize and give people some understanding about why they don't think it's possible,
Right.
and address
And
their fear.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what my TED Talk was really about, was, look, violence is going down, empathy is going up. That's a recipe for world peace, any way you slice it, and why don't you believe that? And getting people to understand, why it is that they have a hard time taking that in with the, if it bleeds, and so you're getting message overload that the world isn't like that, when actually that's just bunkum, and you got to be careful about what you're listening to. So there's that part, and then there's also that whole thing about that we're wired to remember bad things, and so of course you're gonna think of the two bad things that ever happened to you in your life, or the scary moments when you were walking down a dark alley or whatever, versus the thousands of times you walked alone at night and you were perfectly okay. But you're going to be on alert for the two times that it got scary for you. So yeah, just giving people those kinds of that kind of information is really, really important.
And I would imagine people do that for. It makes me think of the many mediations that I've done where, these people have been friends for 30 years. They've had dozens of wonderful experiences and memories together. What's the memory they're keeping? The one that brought them to the mediation table, screaming and yelling. And,
Yeah.
and it's that they only remember the negative experiences because it is hard, and I can respect why our brains are wired that way, so that, you're safe. Your memory's wired that way, so you remember the bad things, so you're more alert, so you can be prepared the next time.
Well, it might be that we remember the unresolved negative things. So there's something about going back and resolving those, and talking about the peace. There's this quote that I just love from Johann Galtung, who is was really started a lot of these peace and conflict studies programs in the universities, and he says, he says, peace is resolving conflict with empathy, nonviolence, and creativity, and it's a never-ending process. So, and it's kind of like I see it almost as a formula. P is equal to C divided by E times C N C peace and creativity. Yeah, C times infinity sign, right?
Right.
Because it's like this conflict is just, it's like it seems we just need ways of resolving these conflicts. And the part,
Sorry, go ahead.
just the part in the peace movements that I'm seeing kind of gets ignored is the empathy part. And I think that might be one of the most critical parts in that formula. If you want peace, is we really need to focus on that empathy part right now, because it just hasn't been developed enough within that equation.
Well, a big part of my work in the world, in every way, is around helping people see more possibility. And truly, it's about being more creative, being able to use your brain in a new way and fire new neurons across and make ideas happen. And, we get stuck. We get stuck in a certain way of thinking and a certain path, and it's a rut, and it's a habitual way of believing the world, is unfolding and all of that. And lots of times what it really boils down to is a failure of imagination. And people they lack the imagination to dream up a better way or a different way for themselves, for their families, life in general. So if they can't do it, even in their own lives, if they can't figure out how to change jobs and, because they hate their job or they hate their boss or whatever, and they lack the imagination to see a different path in that kind of place where they really do have a lot of control over it. What happens when you talk about world peace? That takes a huge leap of imagination, a huge sense of creativity and empowerment that we really have the power to make that happen. I think a lot of times the folks who are like, oh, that'll never happen, it's because they can't imagine it. They simply can't imagine it. But if you can help them see in small ways, well, you've made it happen in your life. Think about the time Aunt Mabel, and you were having that fight and you came to the table and you did it differently and you made peace. So all we have to do is multiply that and multiply that and multiply that and reward it and, make it part of a systemic thing that we all decide to create, and boom, it happens. And it shouldn't be that hard, really.
Yeah, it's that creativity part. I think that's the killer app. It's the combination of empathy and creativity, and to merge those together, I think, is kind of like the engine that can really make a culture of empathy happen. And just finding how that engine works, because the other engine is the engine of fear, right? Closing down and then protecting yourself. And there's kind of like this energy that kind of comes out there. The other one is engaging, empathizing, imagining, and then the creativity. And that's such a rush. That creative, emotional opening is just so intoxicating.
Right. Well, there's an exercise, I think I learned it in action theater, which is a practice created by Ruth Zipporah. And how it works is two people sit facing each other, or stand facing each other, whatever, but they're facing each other. And they, in turn, have someone behind them who is their devil angel kind of person. And these two people start sort of enacting a scene, the two people who are facing each other. And then the people behind them are feeding them emotional qualities like angry, fearful, subservient, whatever. They start feeding them, and they have to, within their dialogue, suddenly turn it really afraid, or getting angry and pushy, or whatever. They have to do whatever their angel devil person is telling them to do. And I'll tell you what, that was a really powerful experience for me, because I realized that in any given conversation I'm having ever with anyone, I have that power. I can be enraged and just feeling so put upon or put out, or like this other person is being so unjust and unfair and just whatever, and making me so angry. And I can just, with a breath, with a shift, with a decision and a choice, say, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be soft. I'm going to be gentle. I'm going to be whatever, fill in the blank. And it changed my life. It changed my relationships. When you can just do I want a do-over. I don't want to be angry anymore. Anger is not serving me right now. I want to choose something else. And you just take a breath and choose something else. And we forget that we have that capacity. That's a creative capacity. We forget we have it. But we do. Every single one of us walking around the planet has that capacity. We can go from, I'm going to punch your face in, to, I'm going to pat you on the back. Or I'm going to reach out and shake your hand. I'm going to dance with you. I'm going to make love to you. I mean, all of those choices are always there. And, so the arts, that's a fabulous training ground for having that capacity to make the world a different place, than, and choose something else. Right.
We're able to go to the next one. So that's a whole nother kind of aspect. I mean, there's so much to really, from a creative point of view, to really explore with empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that made any sense, but we might go into that in more detail at some other point. Oh,
Yeah, well, I think it brought us back to the hero's journey. You face your fears, you go into your fears, and you are transformed. And you just do that over and over again. That's what it means to be alive. Or you sit back and you click through the channels. You don't do anything. So.
Well, okay, we've been at it for about an hour and 15 minutes. Been quite a long dialogue here.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of a final kind of wrap up that you'd like to say? Kind of any concluding remarks? Like how great this talk was, or something.
Well,
I think
I always want to end with thanking. Oh, sorry, Joe. Your
Go ahead.
voice.
Go ahead.
You
I was just saying, I think it's good if people keep
I
talking.
want to thank Edwin. Uh-oh, now I can't hear Joe at all. It's a sign from God. We're supposed to stop.
Yeah, we're kind of, the audio's a bit out of sync here, so let's let Joe go. We're going to be totally quiet until Joe speaks.
I think it's good if people keep talking because they can clear up the misconceptions, the misdefinitions of empathy. And I think when people have a clearer understanding of what empathy is, they'll see how it can better serve us. Now you're
Yes, maybe more than being empathy ambassadors, we have to be empathy evangelicals. Maybe that's the next TED Talk.
Okay.
But no, I was also going to say, Edwin, thank you so much for this work that you're doing. And, I do wish we could get you on Fox News and, just get this message out there to a, big, huge audience. And we'll just, make these things go viral in some way. That's what we really need, So thank you for doing all that you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I would also say it's not only Fox, but MSNBC needs it as well. So I want to be kind of fair about that, because they're really kind of in the same space, and I'm seeing less and less kind of difference in that. We need like this third space, but that's so. I'm glad. I think that these dialogues, you know, it really kind of energizes me. I feel much more kind of spacious, you know, having had this dialogue. So I'm grateful for both of you for engaging, and Joe for bringing, you know, your experience with conflict and mediation, and Rhonda, your experience with the arts and creativity. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our next panels as well.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.